Hello everybody, thank you for joining me. We are gradually working our way through this really long list of runners' problems, and I do hope that my tips and advice are helping you. Now, this week's theme is stitches. As a runner, you've probably had a stitch. Now, I used to get stitches all the time, but I haven't had one for a very, very long time, many months, until the other day when wham, out of nowhere, suddenly really severe pain that made me stop running. And it was a really good reminder to me of how horrible they are and how they can put you off running. So I thought it was a good chance to explain this topic to you in a little bit more detail to try and give you some advice. So, what is a stitch? Well, I'm sure, as I say, as a runner, you've experienced a stitch at some point. A horrible pain. It can be sharp, it can be dull, it can be achy, it can be stabbing, usually felt in the upper part of your abdomen and usually over to one side. It's a pain that seems to be worse when your foot hits the ground. Also a pain that can make you take shallow breaths because the deeper breathing seems to hurt it. And as I say, it can be so severe that it can make you want to stop. Now, the medical term for it is exercise-related transient abdominal pain, ETAP for short. Exactly what it says, caused by exercise in the abdomen and transient, so it usually goes away by itself and doesn't last for terribly long. Now, I think the most important thing to say is that despite how they feel, stitches are harmless. Nothing terrible is going to happen, and there's going to be no long-lasting consequences from having a stitch. Let's think about what causes a stitch. The ultimate answer to this is we don't know. There are quite a few theories, which I'm going to talk through now, but it may well be a combination of these things. It may be none of these things, and it's almost certainly different for different people. So let's think about the possible causes. First of all, as we know, when we're running, everything is jolting around inside, and it's thought that actually the tugging of ligaments on tissues inside may actually trigger some discomfort. So that's one of the theories. The second theory is that it's a friction thing, that when our internal organs and tissues rub against the lining of the abdominal cavity, that friction could actually cause discomfort. The third theory is to do with blood flow. You know, when we're running, our skeletal muscles need so much oxygen and they get an increased amount of blood flowing to them. So that blood gets diverted away from other parts of the body, which at that point in time aren't quite as important. So the gut blood flow reduces, and also it's thought potentially that there might be less blood flow to the diaphragm, and those two things could be responsible for causing the stitch. And the final one is that actually it's nothing to do with any of that at all, and that it's something coming from the spine, and that pain is funny and pain is often not felt at the point where it's caused, and that pain could be radiating around from the spine and be felt in the abdomen and give you that sensation of a stitch. So those are the possible causes. As I say, it could be a combination of all of those or none of those anyway. What we do know is that stitches are less common in cyclists compared to runners. So that kind of adds weight to the theory that it might be to do with the jolting around and the tugging and possibly the friction. We also know they're more common in people after they've just eaten, which would suggest perhaps it's to do with blood flow to the gut. And we also know that they're more common in beginner runners. So what changes when we go from being a beginner to a more experienced runner? Certainly we learn about fueling ourselves, so that adds weight to it potentially being related to gut causes. But we also perhaps get more used to exercise, and our gut and internal organs perhaps become more tolerant and resistant and used to being jolted and jiggled around. As I say, all theories. Right, let's move on. What can we do to stop stitches actually occurring? Well, I think the first thing is the one I've already briefly mentioned there, is digestion and food. It's a really good idea to eat slowly, allow time for your food to be digested before you run. That may be 2 or 3 hours after a meal for some people, but allowing enough time for that digestion can reduce the amount of number and perhaps intensity of the stitches that you get as well. The second thing related to food is to look for trigger foods. So there are certain foods that might be harder to digest and might be more likely to give you a stitch. These are things like very fatty foods or foods which are very heavy in fibre. Doesn't mean they're bad foods, but you may find if you have them close to or before running that you're more likely to get a stitch. Think about the fluids as well. Suddenly downing a whole big drink immediately before you run, that's not a good idea. That could give you a stitch. Better to sort of sip slowly in the hours before your run, and watching what you drink as well, because it could be that fruit juices and very sugary drinks can make you more likely to get a stitch. So perhaps best to avoid those. Another way that you can stop the stitches occurring, or try to, is to make sure you warm up well, gradually easing into your run, giving your body time to sort of prepare for exercise. That can sometimes help as well. Important to talk about breathing. We think, and for some people, making sure that they breathe fully, breathing into their diaphragm, not just up into their ribs, and in a controlled and comfortable, relaxed and regular fashion can make you less likely to get a stitch. So if you're someone who really struggles with it, might be worth looking at your breathing pattern, as well as at your posture, because in order to breathe deeply, we need to have our rib cage able to expand. If we have poor posture when we're running, then often there's restriction in that. So strengthening our core muscles, having the ability to be nice and upright and have good posture throughout our run, particularly our longer runs, could potentially have an effect on whether or not we get a stitch. And the final one to stop it is just to persevere, because as I mentioned, as a beginner runner, I was getting them all the time. And we do find that as you run, as you get more used to running and you run more, then you do find that stitches do gradually ease. So, don't let it please don't let it put you off. Don't let it be the thing. It's not because you're unfit. It's just going to take time for your body to adjust and for you to work out what's right for you. So those are the ways that you can stop it coming. But what about if you're actually out on a run and you're struck down with a stitch? What can you do to try and get rid of it? Because it's so annoying. The first thing I would say is you can just run through it. I find this very difficult. Sometimes that pain is so severe that you just feel like you have to stop. But actually you can just run through and nothing dreadful is going to happen. So, if you're getting close to that PB and it starts, but you think you can tough it out, you can go for it. The second one, sensible and quite easy to do, is just to slow down, reducing the intensity, reducing the speed you're running at, even reducing to a walk for a short period of time can be enough for your body to sort of recover a little bit and for the stitch to ease. Third one, again, coming back to breathing. What are you breathing like when you've got this stitch? Can you do something to slow down your breathing? Can you start counting your strides and counting your breathing in and out so you can get a more regular pattern? And can you make it deeper as well? Concentrating on the exhaling sometimes can help to reduce the stitch as well. One good tip, and I'd quite often do this one, is actually putting pressure on the stitch. It can help. Possibly this adds weight to the fact that it might be caused by movement and friction inside. Actually pressing quite firmly on the area of the stitch can help. Obviously you can do that while you're continuing to run, or while you've slowed down or walked, or even when you're stopping. Stretching is another one that comes you can do when you're running, and this is one that I quite like to do as well. So if the stitch is on your right hand side, you put your right hand on your head and lean it over to the right, so you're stretching the affected side, and that can sometimes be quite helpful. Obviously, say you can do that when you're running, or you can stop and get a deeper stretch. And my favourite one, which I really find helps for me, is to actually stop running and just touch my toes, bending down, taking a few deep breaths when you're there, and slowly coming back up. That can really help. Touching toes is one that does actually work for me. And the final one, which I haven't found very helpful, but I know a lot of people do, is timing your foot strike. So what you do is if your stitch is on the right hand side, you make sure that you're breathing out, exhaling as your left foot hits the ground. Now, what the theory is behind this, I'm not sure. It could be related to the helping you to regulate your breathing patterns. It could just be minimising the jolting inside. I'm not sure, but a lot of people do swear by timing their foot strike. So as I say, if the stitch is on the right, you exhale as your left foot hits the ground. So that's another thing you can give a try. So, I mean, that's a long list of things there that you can have a go with. If I'm quite honest, you know, these are anecdotal. They're not based in science or evidence. And what I usually do is work my way through 2 or 3 or 4 of them. And by the time I've done that, the stitch seems to have gone. And it could well be that all that's happened is time has passed before the stitch started. And it may be nothing to actually do with these interventions that makes the stitch go away. But definitely these are things that you can have a try with. So I would love to know what your experience of stitches is. Do you get them a lot? Do you never get them? Have they gone away? Do they go away quickly? Do they last forever? What have you tried? What makes your stitches ease when you've got them? How do you prevent them? I'm sure there are tips that I have missed, and I would love you to share them either in the comments or on social media. That'll be fantastic. And just to say as well, you know, and I keep going on about this, but I do firmly believe that the more you learn about your body and that you understand what's happening inside your body, the easier it is to understand running and to enjoy running and to make it better for you. So I hope these tips and the way I'm looking at what's happening inside the body are being helpful. If you want to learn more about your body, then please do have a look at my new book, Run Well, published by Bloomsbury and available to buy now on any good bookstores, online or in person as well. And if you head to my website, drjuliettegrattan.com, you can read more about the book and find the link to buy it as well. So that's all for now. I hope you've enjoyed that tip, and I'll be back soon with another one.